Alright guys, welcome to your first video in the Module 8 learning piece. Let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to start with a slope-intercept form review. And remember that slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. So it's just a way you can write an equation to represent certain pieces. So we're going to simply remind ourselves originally that y values are our dependent variable, and our x values are the independent variables. Then we're going to look at these other two variables, m and b, that give us the title of this equation format. So m describes our slope. And slope we can think about as the change in y over the change in x. Or you also commonly hear this as rise over run, which means our vertical change over our horizontal change. And we'll look at those in our next couple examples here. But then let's look at this b variable. This is our y-intercept. And y-intercepts describe where a line crosses the y-axis. So it's the value of y when x is 0. It's also where it crosses the y-axis. And in a written situation, the y-intercept is typically your constant. So those flat fees, that one-time cost, their starting amount, that would be your y-intercept. All right, let's look at this graph and see if we can figure out the equation for it. So my first step is going to be to figure out the slope and the y-intercept. And y-intercepts are really easy to identify because it crosses the y-axis, so you can visually see your y-intercept value. So when I look at this graph, I notice, oh, well, I know this is my y-axis, and this is my x-axis, and there's a point right here that intersects the y-axis, so that must be my y-intercept. Then you look at your intervals, we're going by 2's, so this wouldn't just be 1, it would actually be 2 because it goes 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. So our y-intercept is 2. Slope, we're going to do a little bit more work. So my first step is going to pick 2 points that cross evenly. And what I mean by that is this point crosses evenly, this does not. This point crosses evenly, this does not, and this point crosses evenly. The reason we don't want to use these 2 points that do not cross evenly is because it's just going to make your job harder. And I'm all about making your life easier. So I'm going to pick 2 points. I'm going to use this middle point and our far right point to figure out the slope. And I'm going to use our description of rise over run to really figure out the slope in this situation. So I'm going to figure out, well, I want to get from this point to this upper point. So I want to start down here and get to that point, but I have to figure out how I can get there. I can't go diagonally. I have to make right turns only. So I'm going to go up first, and I would have to go up 3 lines to get to that same level. And because I know that my y-axis goes by 2's, I know that that's 2, 4, 6. So I'm adding 6 to my y. And I know that I'm adding because I'm moving up in the positive direction. So I know that my rise is 6. Now I'm going to figure out my run. Again, I can only make right turns, and I still want to make it over here to this point. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 lines to the right this time. And I'm going to look at my x-axis to see if we're going by 1's. Oh, we are going by halves, so it's 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2, and so on. So this is actually a change of 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2. And I move to the right, so that's a positive change. So that means my run is a positive 2. I divide those 2, and I get 3, so that is my slope. Now that I have my m value and my b value, I'm just simply going to plug those into slope-intercept form, and where there was an m, I'm going to write 3. X and y stay the same, and then where there was a b, I write my b value. And then that would be our equation for that graph. Okay, now let's look at tables. Very similar process here. We're going to find our slope and our y-intercept. And I'm going to start with slope. And when I'm talking about table to equation, I like to think of change in y over change in x. So I'm going to come over here and figure out how do I get from one value to another in my table. So how do I get from 4 to 8? Well, I add 4. How do I get from 8 to 10? I add 2. How do I get from 13 to 31? I add 18. 31 to 40, I add 9. And then I'm going to come over here and take those values and figure out my slope. So my change in y was 18. My change in x was 4. Well, 18 over 4 would be 4.5. And we can make sure that this has a constant rate of change, that this is a slope, by using that other pair. So 9 over 2, well, still 4.5. So I know my slope is 4 5/10. To figure out my y-intercept, I am going to work backwards. So I want to know the value of y when x is 0. So I'm going to add a 0 in our table here. To get from 0 to 4, I would add 4, but we're working backwards. So to get from 4 to 0, I would have to subtract 4. Well, I went plus 4 this way, so really I'm just doing the opposite because I'm going the other direction. So the same thing's going to be true of my y value. So instead of adding 18, I'm going to subtract 18. And when I do 13 minus 18, I get a b value of negative 5. So when x equals 0, y is negative 5. That makes it my y-intercept. So our equation for this table would be y equals 4 5/10 x plus negative 5. You could also write this as 4 5/10 x minus 5, whichever you prefer. They mean the same thing. So those are our equations. Now let's look at a situation. So if I'm given a written situation, again, same idea. We're going to figure out our slope and our y-intercept. And remember, I described y-intercept as our constant. So as we're reading through this, see if you can figure out the constant so we know our y-intercept. Caroline went scuba diving with her family. Scooby's Scuba Center sells all of the gear you need for $85 and charges $25 per hour for family excursions. Write an equation to describe the relationship between the number of hours H her family scubas and see the total cost. Well, I saw right here, all of the gear you need, it only costs $85. And then there is a charge of $25 per hour. Well, $85 is a one-time fee. So all the gear you need, $85, that would be our constant. And then our slope, that is what our rate of change is. So think about slope and rate of change kind of interchangeably here. And our rate at this scuba diving center is $25 per hour. You even see that we're multiplying by a variable with the words in the situation. So our slope is going to be 25. So then our equation would be y equals 25x plus 85. But they gave us some specific variables in this word problem. So number of hours H and see the total cost. So when you think about those things, which one depends on the other? And that's how we're going to figure out which one replaces X, which replaces Y. I know that the number of hours is going to be multiplied by 25. So that means that 25x becomes 25h. The 85 isn't affected. And I know that my total is the result of how many hours they are out. So that's going to be C. So this would be our equation for this verbal situation. All right, that's your first video for Module 8. Make sure you have these notes written down or some notes taken of your own, and then go ahead, click to the next video.